500 people die every single day in road crashes in India.
What is the way forward? How do we deal with this?
One change that needs to happen right away, and that's unfortunately slowing down.
So is speeding really the issue?
Every 10 kilometers per hour increase in the speed basically does, like I said, two things. It increases the chance that you'll be in a crash, and when a crash does happen,
What are similar low-cost interventions that can happen in our cities today?
so
Welcome to the Evo India podcast. We've got a very interesting podcast lined up for you today because with me in the studio is Mr. Ranjit Gadgil. He's the program director of an NGO called Parisar. They're an environment-based NGO, but they also do a lot of work with road safety. And they're part of a larger group of NGOs that are a part of the Road Safety Network. Again, pushing the agenda of road safety. Now, road safety is really important to us at Evo India. We're an automotive channel, podcast, magazine. We love our cars, we love driving, and we spend a lot of time on the road. So safety is hugely concerning for us. Welcome to the podcast, Ranjit.
thank you for having me, and glad to be on Evo.
Let's just get straight to the point with road safety. You're an expert in this domain. If somebody who's actually in the capacity to make decisions today is listening, what would be your top 3 recommendations to make our roads safer here and now, like immediately?
So that's a really interesting question and a challenging question, because selecting top 3 is often hard, and I'm sure that if you'd ask different experts, you're going to get different answers. But we do a lot of work in policy advocacy, and so we interact with policymakers. And I think the first change, and this is going to sound very strange, it's actually a mindset change. And by mindset, I really mean understanding how road safety works, because we've been working on road safety for a couple of decades now. We don't have much to show for it. And one of the reasons, I think, is because we're just approaching road safety incorrectly. And so what's that big mindset change that has to happen? And it's this, that road safety is not about individual responsibility or individual behavior, but it's really about creating a safe road ecosystem in which an individual user will behave in a way that he or she is supposed to behave. And so really for a policymaker, the challenge is, how do I create a safe road ecosystem? And that mindset change is something that I think is going to be critical if we're going to make any headway in road safety. And so this is often referred to in the road safety world as a safe system approach. You basically assume that people are fallible, they're going to make mistakes, they're not going to be perfect drivers. But even when mistakes are made, on purpose or inadvertently, the system should have fail-safes built into it.
There's a safety net.
That's a safety net. So that essentially nobody gets killed or seriously injured. What you're trying to prevent are not accidents, but actually people getting killed or severely injured. So what can you do to create this safety nets, the safe system, so that you can sort of prevent fatalities and injuries from happening? Because this is all theoretical and philosophical, I'll give you one change that needs to happen right away. And you mentioned quite clearly, what's the one thing that can have the best immediate effect? And that's unfortunately slowing down. Speed is something that thrills, of course, we know that. And you do want a road network in the country that's efficient and can operate well. But I think slowing down in the short term is going to give us the most return on investment in terms of reducing deaths and injuries. Because high speeds both increase the chance of being involved in a crash and also increase the intensity, the force with which that crash happens, and therefore raises the possibility of a fatality or an injury. And so speed is something that all road safety experts are constantly worried about and thinking about how can it be better managed.
Right. Now, I have a counter question to that. A lot of government data does attribute road accidents to speeding. If you look at statistically, when you look at government data, the highest attribution is to speeding. But in my experience and from what I've seen, and we've done a lot of driving in India, the speed is usually compounded by another factor, usually a badly designed road, usually a jaywalker, it's a secondary issue that gets compounded when a car is moving fast, which a car is designed to do and a road is supposed to be designed to handle. So is speeding really the issue? Because, I mean, if you look at the first world, speeds are much higher than what we have in India. If you look at an average speed through an Indian city, it's 15, 20 kilometers an hour versus a Tokyo or a Germany or a USA. The average speeds are much higher, and yet the casualties or the grave injuries are much lower. So is speed really the problem, or is it the issues surrounding our road design, our collective, collective nature to follow rules and the enforcement around rules that are the problem?
You're absolutely right. And this is often cited as one of the reasons why speeds have been increased in India, which is to look at other countries where people are traveling at much higher speeds, but then people aren't dying on the roads. The other thing that you mentioned, which is absolutely correct, is that there's never a single factor for a crash to happen. There are multiple factors that are usually involved, and they all sort of conspire to make that crash happen. But there's absolutely no denying that if those other factors were not changed, then speed remains the single issue for crashes being fatal or injurious. It's simple physics, and you can't get around the physics. The physics tells you that the kinetic energy is the square of the velocity.
Correct.
Half mv square. Everybody remembers their high school physics, hopefully. And so every 10 kilometers per hour increase in the speed basically does, like I said, two things. It increases the chance that you'll be in a crash because our roads are so unpredictable.
Yes.
You mentioned things like road design being flawed, there being potholes, there being other obstacles. And that, in fact, heightens the need for lowering speeds because then you can actually react to those impediments in a much faster manner. And when a crash does happen, and they're inevitably going to happen in our country for the foreseeable future, if those crashes happen at a speed which is lower than what they are now, then probability-wise, this is all a matter of statistics, there's going to be a much higher chance of people walking away from that crash without losing their life. So essentially, in other countries, you can go fast and go safe. And in India, because of what you just said, that there are so many other compounding factors, currently, right now, you can either go fast or you can go safe. You can't do both at the same time. If you're going fast, you're lowering your safety record. And so if we want to have a country where people can travel at higher speeds without compromising on safety, so you have the and not the or, then we're going to have to fix a whole slew of other issues, which I'm sure we'll get into as we keep talking.
Yeah, so let's talk about those issues because fundamentally, look, we're car enthusiasts. We're at Evo India, we're car enthusiasts. Our listeners are car enthusiasts. We like our cars. We like to drive. We like spending time on the roads. And it's incredibly frustrating to drive in our slow-moving traffic, our badly designed roads, through our potholes. And it just kills the fun of driving, the joy of driving, the thing that we love, right? So we want to get to a place where we can drive in a manner that's quick and safe. Yeah. But like you said, there's so many issues compounded that cause us grave danger, and I think a fundamental one is street design. Today, we don't have streets that are pedestrian friendly. We don't have public transport, and because of that, our roads are overflowing. The infrastructure can't handle it. What is the way forward? How do we deal with this? We want good roads. We want roads that are smooth in terms of both the tarmac itself, but also the way they flow. How do we get there?
So I'm just going to try and unravel one little, not a contradiction, but something that I think a lot of people struggle with. We have congested roads, and yet we're talking about speed and talking about speed kills. In fact, the Morth report says the Ministry of Road Transport and Highways, which is referred to as Morth by us, says 70% of all the crashes, fatalities are caused due to overspeeding. I mean, that's their simple statistic. And yet, we're constantly talking about congestion. The TomTom index talked about India having the top, whatever.
And Pune is one of the slowest in the world.
In fact, one of the cities where we are recording this podcast. And so essentially what happens is that you have, during peak hours, actually, you have a lot of congestion in our cities. And that's probably not when most of the fatal and severe injury crashes are taking place. Those usually happen once the traffic starts easing off. And in fact, people are so frustrated from that congestion that they do tend to go faster than they should. Even on congested roads, I would argue that often people are driving faster than what they should, given the circumstances. Because what is a safe speed? And a safe speed is going to be decided by the context within which you're driving. So in Japan or in Germany, for instance, 120 kilometers per hour would be considered perhaps on an autobahn a safe speed to drive. Here, it would be considered a very, even 40 kilometers per hour on an urban road in India would probably be considered unsafe. So I think where you're driving, who's driving, and what they're driving will determine together what the safe speed is. If we talk about the roads, for instance, good engineering is, the ministry often talks about the 4 E's, and one of the E's is engineering. How well do you design your roads? And do you design them for safety, or do you design them for speed? Do you design them to be safe for motor vehicle users? Do you design them to be safe for pedestrians and cyclists? Do you design them to be inclusive, meaning can an elderly person, can a person with a disability also use this street? These are all the considerations that have to go into the design of a street. On urban roads worldwide now, the message is we need to slow down. There's mixed traffic. There are people cycling. There are children going to school. There are elderly taking walks. And you just have to make sure that it's safe for everyone. And so there's a big movement towards 20 is plenty, and that's 20 miles per hour, which is about 30 kilometers per hour. That's what a road safety expert would tell you.
Right.
Often, cities will adopt speeds which are maybe 40 kilometers an hour, maybe up to 50 kilometers an hour, certainly not more than that. In terms of designing streets, like you said, it's not just the quality of the surface. That's an important parameter. But whether they are well marked, whether the signage is appropriate, whether your speeds are slowed down where they need to be slowed down, for instance, in a school zone or a work zone, are they well lit? Essentially, and I'm sure we're going to talk about user behavior, the road tells a user how you should behave, how you should drive. Often, for instance, even the design of a road, for instance, having cobbled pavements in very city centers that you'll see now emerging in many parts of the country. In fact, BMC is doing that in the Kala Ghoda precinct, which is basically telling a driver, I need to slow down because this is not meant for speed. This is not a smooth road. This is a cobbled street, which is obviously meant for pedestrians. And so really, and you also mentioned footpaths. So does the road have a well-designed footpath? What about the crossings? That's typically the point where pedestrians and vehicles will interact with one another. Otherwise, the pedestrian is off on his footpath and doesn't have to be worried about traffic. But are those junctions safe? Have they been designed properly? So there's a huge amount of designing that has to go into our streets. I'm very glad to say that India has something called the Indian Road Congress guidelines, the IRC guidelines. They're actually very comprehensive, they're very progressive, and they are very safety focused. Those are the guidelines that need to be adopted by cities, adopted by engineers, and implemented on the ground. We're not seeing that happen as much, but we're hoping in the years ahead, especially the Supreme Court has also now said that they do need to be followed.
Right.
And I think that will help us get to these better designed streets that you're talking about.
Fair enough. You mentioned cobblestones. What are similar low-cost interventions that can happen in our cities today in terms of street design or road design that can make roads safer today?
Absolutely. And this is often called the approach of safety by design. Can I design my streets to be such that even without enforcement, and I'm sure we'll talk about that at some point, but will the street itself tell you how you're supposed to drive? One of the things, of course, is you have traffic calming measures. This is what is called traffic calming. You want to, slow vehicles down. And what you want to do is essentially avoid irregularity in speeds. You don't want very high speeds mixed with, crawling speeds. What you would prefer is to have smoothly moving traffic, which is moving at a reasonable speed. So raised pedestrian crossings, rumble strips, these are all typical, techniques used by engineers at locations where they need people specifically to slow down. The other thing that people do is try to avoid very straight roads, especially in urban areas. And I'm now talking only about urban areas. Highways need to be treated in a completely different manner altogether. But in the cities, rumble strips, raised pedestrian crossings, speed breakers, as they're called, are often employed in order to help people slow down. The other thing that's often used is actually narrower lanes. The width of a lane will often determine how fast a person will go. And so when you're on a highway and where you're expected to, in fact, maintain a certain speed, your lane widths will be a little bit more. And that gives the driver a comfort that he or she can drive at a higher speed. You actually want to do the reverse of that in a city where you want to then reduce the lane widths. And that also has a calming effect on people. Landscaping can often have a calming effect on how people drive. A tree-lined road, for instance, research has shown will slow people down as opposed to a wide open highway with no features at all on it. So there's a host of measures that can be taken. Certain parts of the city, in fact, can be made pedestrianized. And I'm sure even car enthusiasts would love to sort of take a ride, but then go and, walk around in the city center and grab a cup of coffee or whatever it is. So I think that's what you want to make the city. You want to make it so that it's slow and people friendly. And I think it's and we did talk about public transport, but I think, that's also something that one needs to worry about in cities. That in order to reduce congestion, you want to improve the other modes of transport. However, congestion actually helps road safety because people are just going so slow that they're unlikely to be involved in a bad crash.
But like you said, it frustrates people, and the counter consequence of that is as soon as they get an open road, they're letting loose. You spoke about road design, about where pedestrians interact with cars. But that's a very utopian thing. Today in India, we don't even have footpaths. So pedestrians are interacting with cars at every street corner, at every junction, at every road. Today you get out of the road here where we're recording the podcast and there's no footpath, and we're in a fairly upmarket part of the city, So how do you address something, you're talking about road design stuff, that's a very utopian future. But today, where we don't even have something as basic as a footpath, where do we start?
And so, like I said, if you want to start somewhere, you just have to slow traffic down. Creating entirely well-designed footpaths will certainly take a long time, and it will also take a lot of capital investment. But in the short term, even in Pune, people have shown that you can use pedestrian barricades to create a space, carve out a space. This is often used where there's work going on, and God knows we have a lot of work zones in the city at any given time. But what you can essentially do is to put barricades to provide pedestrians with that safe space in which they can walk. And new roads are constantly being built. It's not as if, Indian cities, as we often say, are still being built. And therefore, every single new road that gets developed, I think now we should adopt the highest standard and not call it utopian and tell ourselves that this is a basic requirement. And while, as you well know, it's a privilege to drive, you need to get a license to be able to drive. Walking is a fundamental right. And anybody from a small child to an elderly person should have the right, and I use the word right here, to be able to walk safely in our city.
Right. You touched upon public transport. Again, it's the need of the hour to have more public transport. You look at a city like Tokyo, probably has a higher population density than most of our Indian cities, barring one or two. And their public transport is probably the best in the world. Their roads are probably the best in the world. And that city just functions beautifully, even at rush hour. How do we get to a situation like that? Okay, we slow our cars down. I don't necessarily want to. Maybe in urban areas, fair. But on the highways, I think speeds are required.
And we'll get to the highways, I think, separately.
But how do we get our public transport up and running to a place where it functions like a city like Tokyo?
I do want to caution that Tokyo is in Japan, which is an extremely advanced country. And
disciplined.
And many other things. And I could cite several countries which have absolutely top-notch public transport services and roads, etc. I think we need to keep our ambitions more reasonable. We are a developing nation. We certainly do not have the kinds of money, the kinds of city budgets, for instance, that New York has or Tokyo has, would be vastly more than what a city of Pune would have. Yet, I think you've touched upon a really critical point. In a city like India, in cities in India, where most people actually don't drive or yet haven't entered into that driving category, it's even more incumbent, I think, on the government to provide simple, good quality public transport services. And it's just something that our cities haven't invested in. They do need to invest in that. And here's often where a city has to make a choice between investing in road infrastructure or public transit, because you don't have unlimited funds. And often groups like ours would argue that they're better off investing money in improving public transport rather than building expensive flyovers, elevated roads. Now tunnels seems to be the new craze spreading across cities in India. And this is where they really would do much better by increasing the number of buses, by keeping the fares affordable, and just focusing on the quality of those public transport services also. And I think if that's done, we can really still have cities where most people aren't driving. Those who have to drive will drive and will have a better driving experience. Yeah. But most people don't need to drive to get to their office or go to school or get to their workplace or go to watch a film. And then you don't have to have those people driving on our streets.
Fair enough. And I'm completely in agreement with you there. I think as a car enthusiast, I want to see better public transport because I'm very well aware of the fact that today a lot of people drive because they're forced to. You know, they don't drive because they want to. They look at it as a chore. They look at it as a task that they have to do to get to where they need to. And if they had a different option, they would take it. Absolutely. You know, so if our public transport was a lot better, I think it would, like you said, decongest, and people like us who like driving can enjoy the roads a lot better.
Who want to drive because they want to drive, not because they just need to get to point A.
Precisely.
Which most other people would be happy if they were given an alternative.
Now, who's responsible for this? And who do we catch and point a finger at and say, bro, why aren't you doing your job and why aren't you investing in public transport?
So today is election day in Maharashtra. We all vote. And we've all been following the manifestos of all these political parties. And frankly, I'm a little pleasantly surprised that many political parties this time have in fact promised better public transport. So it's something that I think has come out from the public resentment at the poor state of public transport. I think it's being talked about, especially in light of increasing air pollution. Greenhouse gas emissions is something that we're all worried about. And I think therefore public transport is now being seen as more than just a mobility measure, but also something that will keep the city safe and healthy. And so let's see who wins. And we live in a democracy. We have to continue to make our point to the decision makers. There are NGOs like us that do this full time, but even as a citizen, I think talking to your elected representatives and saying, hey, you know, I really do wish, even though I might be a car enthusiast or even have a car, I still think that it's important for the city to have a good public transport system because that will actually help everyone.
And the second layer to this is that our elected representatives, who is responsible when an accident does happen? Because today, I really think speeding is one issue, but a lot of the accidents are happening because of bad road design, because of bad roads, because of non-enforcement of rules. Who's responsible for this? And who do we put pressure on to take action?
No, you're right. And you're right. In fact, you've correctly identified that there seems to be responsibility of many authorities. And in fact, the safe system approach says that road safety is a shared responsibility. We're going to talk about enforcement, which involves the police. We're going to talk about the road transport officers who give out licenses. And we're going to talk about, I hope, the laxity with which you can get a license in this country. We're going to talk about engineers and how they design the roads. And we're going to talk about the users because they're also part and parcel of the system. And so the shared responsibility principle of the safe system approach tells us that each agency has to do their job. Once a crash happens and somebody gets injured, I think we're entering into a different realm altogether. The police will try to put the blame on someone, there'll be insurance claims, and so on and so forth. A lot of road safety advocacy happens just before that injury or fatality has actually happened, and asking whose responsibility it is. And often we face the same problem that when we're talking to a particular authority, they say, oh, but there's also the responsibility of others. And what we don't want is finger pointing. What we really want is for every agency to clearly know what their responsibility is and perform that responsibility without asking whether others are doing their job. There'll be somebody like a mayor or there'll be somebody like a guardian minister whose job would be to make sure that all the agencies are doing their job. But really, starting from licensing all the way to enforcement by the police, there are clear responsibilities and they have to be performed by those agencies. And we should talk about what those responsibilities are.
Let's do that right now because I think it's an important aspect of what we're talking about. And I think today, at least, there's a sense of helplessness that amongst citizens that the people in charge are not doing their job.
Absolutely.
And there's enough corruption rampant in the system that they can get away with not doing their jobs.
Right. And so I'll talk about corruption. I'll also talk about some of the conflicts that these agencies also face. If you start from the licensing, that's where a person first enters into the world of driving. And we've often seen how in other countries, getting that license is an important step in that person's life. And a typical American sitcom will have at least one episode where this young person has to go through all these trials and tribulations to get that license. We see none of that over here because it's so easy to get a license. So the first thing that needs to happen is that our licensing system has to become much stricter. And it has to focus on not how well you can maneuver a car, but whether you understand safety. Will you drive your vehicle safely?
That's true.
Not how well you can drive it. I mean, the often cited example is that F1 drivers are probably the most skilled drivers in the world, but are probably not the safest drivers because they're not expected to be safe. They're pushing the boundaries of how you can drive. That's not how you expect public driving to be. You want to be safe. You want to have safe. Want to have a defensive driving attitude, and all of these have to be inculcated at the time of getting a driving license.
I completely agree with you. You know, my licensing, when I did my license, the RTO officer made me drive straight for about 100 meters, made me back up for about 20 meters, and I got my license.
Exactly.
You know, I knew nothing about defensive driving at the time.
And sadly, you probably took a test which was much more than what many other people in this country are
Probably.
doing. And so that's the sad part of it. And now what the RTO is doing is they're trying to create these automated testing tracks, etc., so that there's a little bit better testing. But I think we're still a far cry from where the person who's taking your test. You remember there used to be a road test. I mean, I'm old enough to have taken a road test where we actually went out on the road and the RTO officer sat next to me and saw how I drove.
Yeah, exactly.
And one of the pressures that the RTO does face is there's political pressure, there's corruption, but there's also, frankly, just the pressure of the system. If they start doing testing, licensing the way we want it to be done, there's going to be a backlog of a couple of years, and then there's going to be an outcry. So I think there's always some competing priorities that get prioritized over road safety. And one of the things that we talked about in the beginning, what's the big change that needs to happen? We need to take our road safety really, really seriously. So we need to have a politician who'll tell the RTO, it's okay if it takes a little bit longer, but I want to make sure that everyone who gets a driving license is actually skilled and has the mentality to be able to drive safely on our roads. So that's where the role of the RTO comes in. We often, the politicians or anybody else for that matter, will be first to blame errant drivers and errant pedestrians. And I think one of the things that data and evidence has shown the world over, and I myself have lived in the US for 10 years, that people behave better when the enforcement is consistent, comprehensive,
Yes.
and somewhat strict. And I think it's incorrect to say that it's built into our DNA. This needs to be inculcated from school. I think all of these are non-starters. In every society, when you have strict implementation of rules, it doesn't have to be draconian. You don't have to, put people in jail. किसी को सूली पे चढ़ाने की ज़रूरत नहीं है. But you do have to make sure that people feel that there's a good chance that they'll get caught.
Yeah.
And if they get caught, the consequences will be somewhat dire.
Yeah.
They don't need to be, terrible, but there will be a fine. The fine will be somewhat steep, and the chances that you have to pay that fine are almost certain.
Yeah.
Just this works.
Yeah.
And I think this is just like saying going back to basics, and we just simply seem to be unwilling to do so.
I don't think we have to go too far for an example of that. If you look at Chandigarh, they're really strict with the enforcement there. They're strict about something like using your high beam in the city, and they fine you for it. So, and you go to Chandigarh and you drive there. The roads are meticulously designed. You have proper crossroads, you have roundabouts, traffic flows well, but there's discipline.
Yeah.
And it's crazy, you cross the border into Mohali and everybody goes mad. But you come back into Chandigarh and everyone's behaving themselves.
And that's an example of what it tells you in terms of people's mentality. Indian drivers will drive the way they do on Indian streets. They go abroad and they know right away that they're supposed to drive a certain way. And so the way you behave on the road is determined by, we talked about how the roads are designed, because that's telling you how you should be driving. It is determined by how you see other people driving around you. You go to another place where everybody's following the rules, they're disciplined, and you tell yourself, I think this is how one must behave over here. We know that about littering, for instance. You go abroad and you say, it looks like people here don't just throw trash on the road, so I better not do that myself.
Also get fined for it, probably.
And the third part is those who do will get fined, will get caught.
Yeah.
And then we also talked about the licensing. So these four factors will eventually have a huge impact on how people behave on our streets. And so what you're seeing, the way people drive on our streets, is really a symptom of underlying failures on all these four fronts.
Exactly.
Lax licensing, poor enforcement, the peer, everybody's driving a certain way, so you drive like that, and roads which are badly designed and not consistent. In one place they were in one way, in the smart city part they're in another way. Whereas you talked about Tokyo or other countries, it's consistent.
Everywhere.
And which is why you have standards like IRC which tell you don't be creative. When it comes to roads, the consistency is what works much better.
Let's come back to that enforcement point, because I'm, again, a huge advocate for stronger enforcement, because I think that will immediately solve a large chunk of problems. Pune is notorious for our wrong side driving. We've got bikers coming the wrong way, which is probably the most dangerous thing you can do. For braking signals, sometimes it's early in the morning, 7 a.m, there's no traffic. I stop at a signal, the guy behind me is honking, saying, why are you stopping at the red light? What's wrong with you?
Could be dangerous also. You could get hit by someone.
Exactly. Like, being safe is actually dangerous.
Yeah.
It's insane. Driving on the footpaths, today if a road's choked, the bikers just pop up onto the footpath and they're speeding on the footpath, so, and there's zero enforcement for anybody to follow the rules. Where can the enforcement come from? Where does the will to enforce need to be formed for it to happen?
So the reality is that enforcement is always politically never something that people want. And this is not just India, the world over. As soon as the police start enforcing rules, politicians start getting extremely nervous. Because people don't like enforcement, frankly. I mean, you're a unique person who says, I would like to see better enforcement in the city. But many people see it as extortion. People will give all kinds of excuses. I'm late for work. So what if I drive on the footpath, and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
So enforcement is something that the police need political backing. They need a politician who says, you do your job. We're not asking you to be cruel. We're not asking you to be punitive, but you do need to take certain issues and implement them. And I think you gave examples of Chandigarh. And I think we can't talk about Pune without talking about helmets, because this is a city that has decided that we will not wear helmets.
We have an anti-helmet.
We have an anti-helmet
gang.
Helmet Virodhi Manch, which is always amusing when they hear that, Pune, which is supposed to be the Oxford of the East or what have you, has this. And essentially, you're absolutely right. In Kolkata, in Delhi, in Bangalore, the helmet rule is being enforced. In Mumbai, which is in the same state of Maharashtra, the helmet rule is being enforced. And what you really need are police who have been given certain targets and less political interference. In fact, when the police started enforcing the helmet rule in Pune, a bunch of MLAs went to the chief minister and actually told him that, can you ask the police to take his, foot off the pedal on this one? And I think there needs to come a time when we realize that the numbers are so staggering. 500 people die every single day in road crashes in India. We go to war against other countries when a fraction of the number of those people are killed. Rightly so. But we ought to be on a war footing when it comes to 500 people dying. The courts will often play a role in this because they don't have to be worried about political backlash. So in fact, we're very happy that the Supreme Court, in an ongoing case, it's called the Rajasthikaran versus Union of India. It's a matter that has been kept open by the Supreme Court. Under that, they issue directions to states. And we've found that often states are more scared of court directives than anything else. So when the courts said that you have to enforce certain laws, at least for the time being, the police started doing that, because then they could just simply say, hey, you know what? It's a court order. My hands are tied. So I think we need to tie the hands of the enforcement agencies to make sure that they're enforcing the rules. I don't think they're going to be able to enforce all the rules suddenly everywhere. But like you said, they should probably identify the top 3 violations, which are a safety concern more than anything else, and start addressing those. Once you address those, you can keep going down the list until you get to a more disciplined society. We've ignored this problem so long that it has now become a monster. And I think it's going to take a lot of effort. It's not going to happen suddenly. But I think it's going to need political will, maybe court pressure, the roles of NGOs, even the role of auto enthusiastic groups like yours, which say that, hey, we'd like to see safer roads. Other professionals, doctors, orthopedic surgeons are often at the forefront of saying, because they see the effect of those crashes in the hospitals, and they're absolutely horrific, and they realize that they're preventable. So I think we need to get a lot more stakeholders coming together to provide a collective front to say that the time has come when we really need to start enforcing these basic rules.
Coming back to road design, now who is responsible in India today for road design? You spoke about the uniform rules. Sorry, what was the name of the...
They're called the IRC, or
the
India
IRC.
Road Congress guidelines. Yeah.
Who's responsible for making sure that's enforced? Or is somebody responsible for making sure that's enforced? And like today, for example, in Pune, I know in 5 different parts of the city, I'll see 8 different kinds of speed breakers, and the way the dividers are designed, the way the footpaths are designed, the way the road markings are, they can change from kilometer to kilometer.
Absolutely.
Forget across the country. There are parts of the country where it's very well done. There are parts of the country where they don't exist.
Absolutely.
So who's in charge of designing this? Who's in charge of making sure that the norms are followed? Because honestly, today the roads are detrimental to our cars as well. They cause additional wear and tear, suspension parts wear out, tires get slashed, wheels get damaged.
You burn more fuel.
Which
is also adding to pollution,
Yes.
not to mention the cost to the driver. I mean, it's several impacts. It shouldn't surprise you that nobody's responsible, which is why we see what we see on the road. I mean, typically that's a symptom of an underlying systemic issue or a governance issue. Typically, when it comes to highways, you have agencies like the PWD and NHAI.
Yep.
And these are road building agencies. And they've sort of over the years, and these are sort of British era organizations, and they have adopted certain procedures. And typically, although there are flaws in that also, but largely you see that they have engineers who know what the guidelines are and are trying, I think, to implement them to the best of their ability. I think there are lots of other problems there that are preventing really good designs from happening. When it comes to urban areas, on the other hand, especially in Maharashtra, and I want to talk about Maharashtra separately because here the municipal corporation is responsible for road building. So any road building agency, whether it's the municipal corporation, the development authority, the PWDs, in Maharashtra we have the MSRDC, which is the Maharashtra State Road Development Corporation. All of these road building agencies need to have not only engineers who will be taking care of the engineering aspects of roads, but also need to have designers who will make sure that the designs are appropriate. In fact, this was an element that was missing in the law. And the Motor Vehicles Act, when it was amended in 2019, Minister Gadkari, to his credit, introduced a new section which said, that streets have to follow guidelines. This was done in 2019. We didn't have that before that. It wasn't in the law. And essentially said that anybody who violates this can be held responsible under the Motor Vehicles Act. That was done in 2019. I don't think anybody has yet been held responsible, but at least it's in the law, which is a first step for anything to happen. I think the next step, and I think now the Supreme Court has stepped in and said, you need to make sure that that part is now enforceable, because then you'll have to have certain standard operating procedures and certain rules and regulations that will decide if somebody is in violation of a design, who gets hauled up or who gets held responsible for that. This is a common thing in other countries. If there's a design violation which has led to a crash, you can be held criminally responsible. And I think that will start to change the way we do things here in India. And the other thing that has happened, and I think that's something that hasn't really happened as pervasively as it needs to happen, is that you can actually prevent road crashes from happening not after the fact, which is this typical thing that you hear a lot about. It's called black spots, and they're rectifying black spots. There's black spots being rectified means that this is a spot where a certain number of crashes have happened, and therefore it needs to be rectified.
So then they put the rumbler strips and they put the...
And they're supposed to then put in the... But what it means is that this is retroactive. Somebody needs to have been killed before you will go and rectify that spot.
Yeah.
What other countries, advanced countries, do is that they have audits even before the road is designed. So you have design stage audits, you have construction stage audits, then you have audits once the road is opened up for the public. And so you have audits, and these are safety audits that are taking place at every stage of that road being developed.
And I'm sure none of this is happening in India right now.
And so the ministry says that this is happening for highways, but we haven't seen a whole lot of that happening for urban roads or for roads which are not being developed by either the NHAI or by the PWD. And there's a whole bunch of other road building agencies, as we just mentioned. And I don't think that they're doing these road safety audits. That will ensure that somebody checks whether that road was built to the design specifications that it was intended to follow. This is fairly standard in most other industries. This is just something that hasn't happened in the road building industry yet.
Yeah. Today, we talk about car safety, and a lot of cars are marketing themselves as safe cars with their 5-star ratings and stuff like that. So safety has become a big part of the conversation around cars, and clearly safety auditing, as you would put it, has become a part of the automotive industry, where before they launch a car, they're trying to ensure it's safe, and we need to see that from road developers as well.
Absolutely.
Now, road development in India itself, isn't the way it's done a problem in itself? Because the way the tenders are floated, the guy that brings the lowest cost wins the tender. Therefore, he's incentivized to keep his own costs low. He's also incentivized to make a poor quality road because then he can fix that road and make more money off of fixing that road. That system itself is flawed. And how do we address something like that? How do we incentivize a road builder to make the best quality road and the safest road possible?
Yeah, I mean, see, all government contracts will be based on a tender and the lowest cost, because that's what governments will say, that we're saving you public money when it comes to spending that. However, that doesn't mean, and you're right in saying it doesn't mean compromising on the safety standards or other quality standards that need to be adhered to. I think having independent audits, having those audits be in the public domain, having groups like yours, mine, several others that get into the habit of looking at these audit reports, making those public, are the kinds of things that need to happen in order to make this change. Parisar, for instance, recently did an audit of the cycle tracks in Pune. We do have a few of them, but they're not in a great shape. Most people don't use them. And so we decided to do a multi-parameter audit of every single cycle track. We put that audit report in the public domain. We shared it with the municipal corporation, and now we'll have a dialogue with them in terms of how they can fix those streets. These kinds of audits should be done by the agency itself, not necessarily by the same department. So you want to have that independence and separation in terms of who's doing the audit versus the department that's actually responsible for this. These are governance issues. They're not new. This kind of auditing happens when it comes to accounts and many other aspects of public spaces. But we need to insist that this happens for roads also. Absolutely.
Yeah, now today, Pune's been in the headlines for the cycling competition that's going to be happening here, and the way the roads have been improved for that, and the way the cycling tracks are being improved for that.
So they won't improve the cycling tracks because professional cyclists will ride on the
right.
motor carriageway. In fact, which is why the motor carriageway is being made better. In fact, they had to remove most of the speed breakers because those are not good for cyclists. It will lead to more crashes, so we are concerned from a road safety point of view, because often that's the only reason why people will slow down in front of a school, in a hospital zone, in a residential area. So it's not ideal, but we've also been promised that they will be reinstated, as you said, in a very standardized format. We insisted that now let's not be creative about those speed breakers. Let they be following the proper IRC guidelines, so that we can make the roads safer.
But I don't think you need to worry, because come the monsoons, I'm sure those roads will wash away. There'll be pothole ridden. Everybody will slow down. But let's now move on to the highways. Yeah, the government has been tom-tomming a lot about how they're increasing the road network in India, and to their credit, they have. Like I said, at Evo India, we do a lot of cross-country drives. We're driving Kashmir to Kanyakumari, Pune to Arunachal. We're doing all of this stuff, and we have seen the evolution of road networks. We have seen how travel time has come down because of the new expressways and stuff that have built in the country. But we're also very well aware that these expressways are of very poor quality. You look at that Samruddhi Mahamarg. It's a marquee project for Maharashtra, but the quality of road is atrocious. It's concretized, it's bumpy, and the speed limit is 120. But at 120, you hit a bump and you can be launched into the air.
Absolutely.
And there are a lot of those bumps.
Yes.
Where do we go from here? I mean, we're building world-class infrastructure projects, but they're in pathetic shape.
Yeah, and I do want to stress that it's a matter of many things. It's not just the pure engineering of that road itself, which is so many meters wide, a ribbon that goes through there. But when you're looking at road safety, you have to be worried about not just the construction quality, which you've already mentioned, and I think it's really valid, but what's the design of intersections, off-ramps, on-ramps, how are they designed? We often have roadside establishments that come up after the fact. They're not supposed to, but we know that we have lax enforcement. Often the land use around highways is such that you have children crossing highways in order to get there to their school, which is on the other side, because nobody has provided them with the safe pedestrian crossing. There are villages that are adjoining these highways. And so really the context within which we are driving on our highways is completely different. My experience of driving on a highway or a freeway in the US is completely different from when I'm driving on a highway in India. And so, therefore, unfortunately, one of the things that you need to do is to get people to slow down. I think 120 kilometers per hour is not a safe speed given the Indian context. We have poor enforcement of even that speed limit. So on the Samruddhi Expressway, for instance, once the speed limit is 120, people are likely to go up to 140, 150 kilometers an hour. And you have all these roadside issues that aren't ideal. You have very poor post-crash response systems. We often talk about the golden hour in which medical help is supposed to reach a person. We lose a lot of lives because people don't get the medical care that they need to within the time period. Again, not a problem in Japan, not a problem in Germany, where people are driving very, very fast, but they have all these ecosystems in place. And so I think that highway development, and especially, one of the things that, again, as road safety experts, we look at this from the lens of safety. We have about 177,000 people who die in road crashes every year. These were the numbers revealed by the minister. These are for 2024. Out of that, almost 64,000 get killed on our national highways. And there's another number that becomes really important when you're looking at road safety. It's called the severity. What that tells you is that the number of fatalities, how many people died in every 100 crashes or accidents that take place. Obviously, higher that number tells you that the crashes that are happening are really severe.
Yeah.
Hence the word severity. That severity number is about 36 for the national average. So about 36 people die in every 100 crashes that take place. This number for national highways is 43. So it's much higher. And again, one of the big differences, the speed at which you're traveling on the national highways, which tells you that when there is a crash on a highway, and if you're going at a higher speed, again, it's a question of probability. You could be in a high speed crash and just walk away from it if you're lucky. But purely from a probability point of view, the higher the speeds, the higher the chances of you being killed. And I'm sure the numbers will also reflect in the severe injuries. And so what we want, you're right, we want more. You want a road network across the country which is safe, I think more important than anything else. But of course, it's the backbone of our economy. We want to be able to transport people and goods faster or in less time from point A to point
B.
More
efficiently at
a lower cost. You want fuel cost to go down. But I think we're going to have to strike a balance in the short term between reaching safely and reaching quickly. I think there are lots of other reasons why we also slow down on our highways. We've been talking about toll booths. There are many other reasons why people are not able to reach their destination. You reach the edge of a city and suddenly your speed goes down. So all the speed that you've made up on the expressway or the highway is completely brought down once you come into the city. So I think there are lots of other improvements that can also happen that can reduce your travel time without necessarily increasing the speed on which you travel on some of those expressways and highways.
Now, my question is something like a Samruddhi Mahamarg or many of the other expressways that have come up in the past 5 to 7 years. These are basically greenfield projects. There was no reason why good design couldn't have been integrated from the get-go. There's no reason why good surfacing couldn't have happened from the get-go. Like you said, the entries and the exits, the toll booths, the rest areas, the by-lanes, and we don't even have those safety, what do you call them, pull-off areas on these expressways because it's not designed into them. Why couldn't have they been done from day one to allow us to do the 120 safely? And the pedestrian crossings and the crossings for the villages around and for everybody.
Yeah, I mean, I think cost is going to be one consideration. I'm not an expert on highway construction, so I won't be able to talk to this subject with great expertise. My general sense is that costs will become an immediate concern because all of this will make your costs go up. I think we have governance issues, we have corruption issues. I think those cannot be ignored either. And also, even when we say something is a greenfield project, I think we just live in a country where there are people literally everywhere. And there's always farmland, there's land acquisition issues. And I think it isn't easy. I don't think it's an easy exercise. And therefore, I think that in order to add that 20 or 30 or 40 kilometer speed limit to the expressway, it may incur a much higher cost. And I really would even from a governance point of view, I would ask the question of, are you getting the right return on investment for trying to get to that extra 20 kilometers per hour?
You're getting safety out of it.
If you can lower the speed limits knowing that this is how it's going to be, I think I would rather make sure that people are safe. You don't want to build a Samruddhi Expressway the way they've built it and then have a carnage of lives being lost on that highway for years to come. I think we have to make certain choices in terms of what is socially most beneficial. But that is what we have an elected government for. That's the kinds of choices that the ministry makes. But the ministry is now up against, I think, a hard wall because numbers can't lie. On many other things, the government can say, oh, we've done really well and sort of spin numbers. Here's where the rubber hits the road, as they say. 177,000 people died. Can't get away from it. The target for the country is to half the number of deaths and injuries by 2030. We're nowhere close to it.
Yeah.
And therefore, the government has to decide what are its priorities. And if other things aren't working, either get them to work or do the things that are necessary in order to save lives. We simply cannot stand by and allow 500 of our fellow citizens die every single day.
Yeah.
And so the ministry will have to do much more than what it's doing. It is the nodal ministry. It has an enormous impact on what the states need to do because there's a state responsibility when it comes to licensing and enforcement and often the non-national highways, which are developed typically by the state governments. But the ministry has to take the lead in saying safety is now paramount. For the next 5 years, we need to place safety above everything else.
Yeah.
And I think once we inculcate that idea that we need to be safe, I think we will then be able to get to those high speed and desirable roads that I think at least, people from your group will enjoy driving on.
Fair enough. I think it needs to be clear that the onus of safety, while it is a collective responsibility, needs to be driven by the administration today because it can't be the onus of the citizenry to take that up suo moto and just do it themselves.
Yes.
It needs to be driven by the government. After this conversation with you, I'm getting a sense of helplessness because I don't even know where to start addressing this. So do you have examples from the past where there have been wins for road safety in India, maybe through administrative will or through public will or anything that gives us a light or an example that we can look to and hopefully replicate?
No, I think that, and I think the worst thing for us as citizens is for this despondency to set in. I think we have to always believe that we live in a democracy, which means that we as citizens have the right and have the power to be able to get the government to do what we think is important.
Yeah.
I think most people perhaps still don't think safety is as important. When I'm out on a motorcycle, I'm not wearing a helmet. I don't think safety is something that's the first thing that comes into my mind.
Yeah.
It hasn't been, for instance, an election issue where congestion and other issues have been talked about a lot more than, let's say, safe roads.
Yeah.
So in a sense, it's reflecting the priorities of society. And so I think it's really important that programs like this help to create awareness about why it's important. It's a big problem. It can be solved. Whose responsibility it is. I think writing about it, talking about it, in engaging with the decision makers is something that we all have to take as a responsibility as citizens in a democracy. There have been plenty of success cases. India isn't as bad as it seems. And I'll give you another set of numbers which will make you feel a little happier. Actually, when you break down the 177 deaths that have happened in the country, sadly, a bunch of them now happen to be two-wheelers and pedestrians. They make up more than 1 lakh of these 177,000 deaths. The other, which consists of people who are traveling in cars, buses, trucks, autos, etc., essentially somebody who's inside a vehicle, actually those numbers have gone down.
Okay.
That's significant in a country where more people are driving, more highways are being created. If that number has gone down, I think that's a matter of success that the ministry can claim. And it's largely been driven by, for instance, safety regulations being stricter for vehicles. For instance, in-vehicle technologies have really come a long way. The Bharat NCAP program, which is now still in its voluntary phase but will soon probably become mandatory, will also help to improve the safety of vehicles. So really we need to focus on the safety of pedestrians, who are the most vulnerable road users, and motorcycle users. That's socioeconomically the most important way of getting around. There are, of course, enthusiasts like yourself, but for most people, it's just a regular way of getting around. It's cheap, it's convenient. A lot of women tend to drive two-wheelers, students, even older people, villagers, everybody is driving a two-wheeler. Clearly, this vehicle isn't as safe as we think it is, which means that at least people should be wearing a helmet, which leads to enforcement. India is really good when it comes to our legislation. Shouldn't surprise us, but at least our laws are in place. In countries like the United States, even the laws aren't up to global best standards. Our law tells us everybody has to wear a helmet. We have strict drink driving rules, at least on paper. So there's a lot to work from. I think our courts have been very active. A lot of citizens have had success filing PILs and other ways of trying to get the government to do its job. There have been wonderful directions that have been passed by the Supreme Court, frankly, even by the various high courts around the country. So we have to build on these successes, not lose hope. Think about what else we can do. If the problem seems too big, take one small issue out of it and try to pursue that. I think that's the way forward.
The salami technique, cut it up into pieces and address them one by one.
Absolutely.
To our listeners today, if they want to, say, become more involved in road safety, of course, they can be better drivers, better riders, more responsible.
Yes.
But if they want to advocate for it, where do they start?
I think everybody's a pedestrian, and we've seen that pedestrian numbers are pretty high. I think every person can demand that their neighborhood, where they live, perhaps where they work, should be safe for people to walk. The law's on their side. The Supreme Court has said it's a fundamental right. Cities are supposed to have grievance systems in which you can put in a grievance and they're supposed to solve it. It won't happen the first time. But I think collectively, if people come together and start saying, how can we make our neighborhood safe? Parents can demand the same thing from schools. How can children walk or cycle safely to school? It's a joy. It's not just a right. Frankly, I enjoyed cycling to school. Children love walking to school with their friends and having a good time. I'm sure children don't like to get stuffed into a van and ferried around. And I think that's something that some schools have done. They have created something called a safe school zone. So you don't have to, again, the salami thing that you said, you can really, cut it down to bite-sized pieces. We're going to have elections. We're going to have corporators. Tell your corporator, can you take up one school in our neighborhood to make it safe? There are guidelines that exist. Ask your city to allocate budgets for it. These are small steps that citizens can take. They can always reach out to groups like ours, like Parisar, and we can also guide you in how you can take this forward.
Super. And on that positive note, I think we can end this podcast. Thank you so much, Ranjit, for joining us today. It's been really insightful. The breadth of the issue, it is vast, But like you said, break it down, address it one by one, and hopefully we'll get to that utopia that we want to reach one day.
Thank you very much for having me. I really enjoyed our conversation.
Thank you. And thank you for listening. If you have questions about road safety, do drop them in the comments below. We can get in touch with Ranjit and get them answered in the comment section. And if you have thoughts about this, do drop them below. Let's have a conversation about road safety in the comments. Thank you so much for joining us today. We'll see you again next week.